Story 1. My husband cheated on me. Ever since I found out, he's been acting different. Justin and I had been together for 10 years, married for 6. I'd been with him for my whole adult life. We'd been dating since I was 17 and he was 18. I always thought he was my soulmate, the man I wanted to grow old with. Turns out, I was wrong. I was devastated when I found out. Yes, Justin had been staying out later than usual, and his explanations were usually flimsy at best. I'm not stupid. I had my suspicions, but I think I just really didn't want to come to terms with the fact that my husband was seeing another woman. Honestly, I might have gone years without discovering the truth. But Justin got sloppy. "Welcome home, honey. Fun night out with the guys after work again?" "Aha," Justin grumbled, brushing past me. "I made dinner if you're hungry. Beef tips and rice. I know it's one of your favorites. Ate at the bar." "I'm going to bed," he muttered, steadying himself against the wall, before woozily clomping up the stairs. My heart sank. Nights like those were becoming more and more frequent. I loved my husband. All I wanted was to spend a little quality time with him after a long day at work. But he couldn't even spare me a few minutes. I glanced up at him as he lumbered up the steps, a tear trickling down my cheek. In an instant, any sadness that I felt was replaced with burning rage. Because when Justin passed underneath the overhead light, I saw what appeared to be a hickey on the side of his neck. A cocktail of emotions swirled within me. Despair, resentment, betrayal. They all hit me like a ton of bricks. I was stunned. I didn't know what to do. I mean, who would? The man I had been head over heels for all that time had stabbed me in the back. I was in disbelief. I stumbled to the kitchen, pulling out a chair, before I could collapse. I stared into space, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I sat there for a long time, deep in thought. After a while, I felt numb. Like my entire personality had been flushed down the drain, leaving nothing but an empty husk. Then, a thought flashed across my mind. I'd been mistaken. That had to be it. Just a mere trick of the light. It was a pretty dimly lit hallway, after all. Whatever the case, I had to know. I tiptoed upstairs, abandoning my dinner. I crept up to our room as quiet as a church mouse, before lightly pushing open the bedroom door. Justin was fast asleep. I didn't waste any time. I rushed across the room, careful to avoid any squeaky floorboards, and I inspected Justin's neck. His snores grew louder as I approached. He always was a heavy sleeper. I cursed when I got a closer look. Justin was sleeping on his side, and I was not going to try to roll him over. I glanced around, searching for anything that might provide concrete evidence. My eyes fell to the bedside table. Bingo! I snatched Justin's phone from his charger. I held my breath as I pressed his meaty thumb onto the screen to unlock it. I grinned, feeling a rush of exhilaration as I achieved my goal. Waha! I froze. Justin groggily opened his eyes a sliver as my hand hovered over him. My blood turned to ice, and I prayed with all my might that my husband would just go back to sleep. To my immense shock, my prayers were answered. Justin mumbled incoherently under his breath, before grabbing a fistful of covers, and nodding off. I'd escaped by the skin of my teeth. I had to be more careful. The first thing I did was check Justin's texts. I immediately saw a woman's name I didn't recognize. My heart shattered when I read the messages. "Hey baby. Last night was incredible. See you again after work today? You're damn right. I wish you never had to leave. What about that wife of yours though? Won't she get suspicious? Her? Not a chance. Even if she does find out, she won't leave. I could murder a baby in front of her and she'd still think I was a saint." A deep-seated rage bubbled within me. Did Justin really think that little of me? He clearly saw me as nothing more than a spineless, codependent pushover. Well, I'd show him. I screenshotted the evidence, scrolling through dozens of nude photos that I hadn't taken, and sent everything to my number. I deleted any proof of my snooping, then replaced Justin's phone on the charger. I stormed out of the room, grabbing my keys as I went. I made it halfway across the living room when the realization hit me. I had nowhere to go. All my family lived 7 hours away. It was too late to book a decent hotel, and I really didn't want to drag any of my friends into my drama. Not yet, at least. That left me with one option. I had to sleep on the couch. I plopped down onto the sofa and sighed. I didn't want to have to confront it, but I knew what I had to do. In the morning, I was going to find a lawyer and start the divorce process. The thought alone was enough to break me. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I cried like a baby, silently sobbing into a scratchy pillow for what must have been hours. My eyes were puffy by the time I was done. I couldn't fathom falling asleep in a state like that, but I must have at some point. Because the next thing I remember, sunlight was flooding through the blinds. "Morning, babe. How'd you dash?" The rest of the sentence caught in my throat. That was right. Justin and I were about to be over. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table, tears stinging at the corners of my vision. I opened up the texts I'd sent myself as proof that the past 12 hours hadn't been some twisted nightmare. But the messages were gone. My eyes grew wide as I stared at the screen. That couldn't be right. They'd been there, clear as day the night before. Something wasn't adding up. I suddenly paused, bolting upright. Was that breakfast? The tantalizing aroma of eggs and bacon wafted around the corner from the kitchen. My brows furrowed. Justin never cooked. My breathing was shallow as I tentatively shuffled toward the kitchen. Curiosity gnawed at me like a piranha. I apprehensively peeked around the corner, unsure of what I would find. To my shock, there was my husband, humming a little tune while flipping pancakes. I rubbed my eyes. Was I seeing things? Surely I was delusional from lack of sleep. That had to have been it. Then, Justin turned, his icy blue eyes locking onto mine. "Morning, princess. I hope you're hungry. I saw you sleeping on the couch, and I thought you might not be feeling well, so I decided to make you a hot meal to help you get better." My heart skipped a beat. Was this really my husband? It looked like him. Sounded like him too. Still, I was weary. Yeah. Just feeling a little under the weather is all. Are you feeling okay? You're acting different. Never been better. Honestly, I think I've really turned a new leaf, he said, placing a steaming plate before me. The old Justin is caput. From now on, I swear, I'm going to be the best husband I can be. Our gazes connected, and I searched his expression for answers. He seemed genuine. If this was an act, it was a damn good one. Thanks, babe. That really makes me happy to hear. Justin beamed at me, the warmth of his smile seeping into my heart. It had been years since he looked at me like that. Well, get used to it. Because I'm keeping my word. I love you, Lydia. I wanted to be suspicious. I wanted to remain silent. I wanted to keep my guard up. But how could I? All I needed was love and attention, and I was finally getting it. For the first time in a long time, it felt like my husband actually cared. "I love you too, Justin," I muttered, before digging into my meal. A big part of me was still leery of my husband. His timing was pretty convenient, after all. But even with all my doubts, Justin was seemingly sticking to his promise. He took me out on dates, paid to get my nails done, bought me flowers, he even started shouldering most of the housework. Needless to say, I was impressed. If he would have kept that up, I might have never suspected a thing. But one night, he slipped up. We were cuddled up on the couch, watching The Truman Show, when I asked. Now, I wish I would have kept my mouth shut. "Hey babe?" "Yes, my love?" Justin asked, his eyes still glued to the screen. If someone close to you was an imposter, like a perfect replica except for a few tiny changes, do you think you'd notice? Justin tensed up, his eyes wide as he slowly turned to face me. A blank stare had overtaken his expression. A chill rippled through my body when he looked at me like that. He was beginning to frighten me. I suppose so. Why do you ask? His voice was monotone, dripping with a tinge of urgency. I didn't know how to process his sudden shift in personality. It's the premise of the movie we're watching. I watched as the color seeped back into his face, and he loosened up, breathing a sigh of relief. I cocked a curious brow. Why was he acting so strange? That makes sense. We sat there in uncomfortable silence, shifting our attention back to the TV screen. After a few more tense moments, I couldn't take it anymore. I've got to use the restroom and charge my phone. I'll be right back. No need to pause the movie for me. Justin nodded, before grinning up at me. His smile. Had his teeth always been that straight? Okay, baby girl. Hurry back. Wouldn't want your spot to get cold. Yeah, sure thing. I practically bolted up the stairs, locking myself in our room. I slumped against the door, trying to steady my palpitating heart. What was going on? Was it just me, or was that some seriously freaky behavior? Either way, I needed a second to calm down. I had my eyes shut, focusing on my breathing, when I heard it. My phone was buzzing from inside my pocket. I hurriedly retrieved it, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. I normally don't answer calls from strangers. But something compelled me. Maybe it was intuition, or perhaps I just wanted someone to talk to other than my husband. In the end, I accepted the call. Hello? Lydia? Lydia Atkins? Speaking. Look, this is going to sound crazy, but I need you to hear what I have to say. Okay? I suddenly jolted up from my spot on the floor and stared at the locked door separating me from the hallway. Loud knocks rattled it in its frame. Lydia! Lydia, who are you speaking to? Panic surged through me as I scrambled for an answer. It's my mom. Go back downstairs, I'll be there in a minute. That was him, wasn't it? The caller said. That was my husband, yes. Why do you ask? I whispered, putting as much distance between myself and the door as possible. Lydia, I need you to hear me out. Can you promise me that you will? The pounding on the opposite side of the room grew even louder. Lydia, don't listen to her. She's a fucking liar. My stomach began to twist itself into knots. How did he know? I'm listening. I'll hear what you have to say. The woman on the other end of the line breathed an audible sigh of relief. Okay. My name is Adeline, and Justin and I have been seeing each other for about 9 months. That man in your house is not your husband. My blood turned to ice, and I began to tremble. No. That couldn't be true. In a shaky voice, I asked the question that will haunt me until I die. How do I know you're telling the truth? There was a long pause, the bangs outside my door reaching a nauseating crescendo. When Adeline answered, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was in serious danger. Lydia, for the past week, Justin has been living with me. Story 2. A Malaysian haunted house. His fever wouldn't subside, I thought, struggling as a surge of panic welled in my chest. Matthew had always been a sickly child, but this was different. I cradled his head, feeling the unusual stiffness in his neck. His eyes looked as though they had seen too much for his 5 years of age. It was the living room, it was the damned house. I fished my phone from my pocket, careful not to disturb Matthew. 11:45 p.m., my husband should have been home by now. A part of me resented him for making us go through this ordeal. I quelled that thought. This wasn't the time nor place for conflict. He was on call after all. I would call him if he hadn't arrived by 12:30 a.m. My husband, a government doctor, was given an assignment to a rural town in the heartland of Perak, Malaysia. His assignment was only for a month, and all lodging and expenses had been taken care of by the government. We had arrived a week prior to an old but respectable colonial bungalow built in the 1800s. A nurse's quarters sat directly opposite of the bungalow. On the day of arrival, I remarked with amusement to my husband that Matthew and I would lodge with the nurses if he hadn't come home for the night, because the house would have been too big for just Matthew and I, and not to mention that the house was a little creepy, especially at night. There were long corridors right beside the living room, corridors that would melt into the darkness when night came, not to mention the antiquated rocking chair. Bang! A lightning pierced my reminiscence and brought me back to the present. I heard a dreadful but familiar click as the lights shut off. I would have cried if I could. I would have run out of the house with Matthew if I could. I willed myself to remain calm. After all, wasn't I the rational one in the family? Matthew was in no shape to move. Doing so would only worsen his condition. My husband would return, and we could talk about moving to a different lodging. After all, it was just darkness, and no darkness was as bad PEO. Wait a minute, did I see the rocking chair by the window move in my peripheral? It couldn't be. I directed my gaze to the chair, willing my eyes to adjust to the darkness, and silently praying for the chair to remain still. I breathed a sigh of relief as I saw that it was indeed still. I pinched myself, snap out of it. Your paranoia was not doing Matthew and myself any good. Matthew moaned and I began rocking my body back and forth, hoping that the lull would put him into restful sleep. Almost immediately, the hairs on my hand began to stand, and I began feeling an overwhelming sensation of dread. I instinctively shut my eyes, unwilling to come to terms with what may be lingering in the room. Supernatural or not, I did not want to know. And then I heard Matthew crying, although his cries seemed to be coming from the floor above. His sobs were agonizing, almost exaggerated, and it was unlike any I had ever heard. They sounded as if he was tormented. Worse, he sounded unhuman, as if an entity was making a mockery of what a human child would sound like. Without thinking, I scooped Matthew and dashed for the door, running frantically towards the nurse's quarters. I banged on the reception door like my life depended on it. Almost immediately, a matron opened the door and ushered me into the quarters. Without asking for an explanation, she prepared a room and asked us to rest for the night. I was too tired to protest as I embraced Matthew and fell into deep slumber. I woke in the early morning to Matthew's snores. Gingerly, I placed a hand on his forehead, and was relieved that his fever had broken. It wasn't long before I heard my husband asking for us in the corridor outside. In my head, I was ready to convince him that I was not going back to that house, and I was ready for the ridicule. It was what we would do to each other after all. I was surprised that he agreed to us staying in a hotel for the duration of his placement in Park. He told me that the matron had filled him in on the need-to-knows, and he would give me a rundown after we had checked into the hotel. As we left the quarters, the matron gave me a sympathetic look, gently squeezed my arm, and without so much as a word, returned to her duties. According to the matron, the house had been haunted by a Pontianak. Pontianaks were women who had died during childbirth. Their spirits would linger in this world, vengeful and spiteful, seeking to be given another chance at motherhood. Unfortunately, there was no way that the nurses could report the hauntings to the government. After all, governments had to rely on facts in making decisions, not superstitions. On that night, at approximately 12 a.m., the matron saw a beautiful woman sitting by the window of the old house, in the rocking chair, brushing her hair. To her horror, the woman removed her head, placed her head on her lap, and sneered at the matron, as if she was aware that the matron had spotted her. I did not blame the matron for not coming to my rescue. After all, the matron had not known that I was in the house with Matthew, because the lights were off. Oh, and the matron mentioned to my husband, almost as an afterthought. A telltale sign that a Pontianak was at a distance was the loud and nearby wailing of a child. If you'd hear a child crying at a distance, say upstairs. It meant that she was right beside you. Story 3. It followed me home from the haunted farm. Today, my friends and I started celebrating the Halloween season by going to a haunted farm off in the outskirts of town. I use the term haunted loosely, because this place is really just a scaled-down theme park that's been in the region for over 20 years. I don't scare easily, so I wasn't expecting much from the visit aside from a bit of lighthearted fun with friends. Who would have thought after an evening of cheap jump scares and screaming mostly to be polite, I'd find myself sitting in my bed, genuinely shaking in fear? I certainly didn't, yet here I am, all because something followed me home. Whenever a car drives down the street, I can catch glimpses of it slowly crawling down my neighbor's house and towards mine, as though toying with me. It all happened because of that damn farm. We arrived at the farm late in the afternoon. It was nice out, not too hot, not too cold. The farm was neat, though it wasn't overly spooky looking in the light of day. They'd built a few old Wild West-style houses they'd decorated with pumpkins and giant spiders, had a few creepy mascots walking around, and sprinkled demonic baby dolls where they saw fit. In the daytime, this place was a playground for kids. I saw more bouncy houses and face-painting stations than scary attractions, but I expected things would change once the sun went down. My friends and I headed out to do the corn mazes while they were still open, and then headed to the food trucks for supper. By the time we were done eating, it was finally dark out, and the toddlers had sprouted into teenagers. As expected, the park looked a lot creepier at night. They'd turned on their fog machines and colored lights to give the place a surreal atmosphere. The mascots had changed their makeup from sort of menacing but still friendly to sort of demonic, with a few vampires and masked witches thrown in for good measure. It was fine. Not all that scary, though. I'm not trying to make myself out to be some unshakable badass or anything, but I honestly don't scare all that easily. I'm not really susceptible to things I know aren't real. Creepy music and plastic hatchets just don't work on me. You could blame my time hanging around no sleep for the desensitization, but the truth is, I've always been pretty numb to horror. I'm more afraid of practical things, like being stuck in line for a haunted hayride for half an hour with a bunch of rowdy 13-year-old kids screaming profanities to try and outshock one another, splinters, and disgusting porta potties, the first and last of which I experienced at the farm. Ugh. My friends and I walked around and tried out the different attractions. We did the aforementioned hayride, the Witch's Coven, and the demonic funhouse, which was fun for all the wrong reasons. See, the funhouse was pretty tame, all things considered. You walk your way through the world's most straightforward maze, and from time to time, a creepy clown appears out of nowhere and kind of shuffles behind you and follows for a bit. I can see how that might be a bit unsettling to kids, but these clowns were all actors and they weren't allowed to actually touch anyone, so there really wasn't anything to be scared of. That didn't stop this one chick from breaking down outside the attraction. This 20-something gal totally lost it. She was sobbing in her boyfriend's arms, and I couldn't help but laugh as we walked past her. Sorry, but if you can't handle a clown standing next to you for half a second, maybe you shouldn't be going into a demonic funhouse. Just saying. Check yourself before you emotionally wreck yourself. It was getting late, and we still had one major attraction to go to. According to our map, it was the scariest of them all. 4 chainsaws out of 4. Having heard screams of abject terror coming from that side of the park, I was really looking forward to seeing what all the fuss was about. Along the way, my friend pointed out a cemetery with a half-open gate and not a soul in line to go in. There had been a 30-minute wait for all the other attractions, but this one was as still as the grave, pun intended. Should we go in? She asked. Might as well, I replied. The door squealed as we opened it the rest of the way. Oh, boy. Someone had left the fog machine on overnight. The curtains of smoke were so thick, I couldn't even see my own feet. I grabbed the friend behind and in front of me just so we wouldn't lose one another in the mist. That's how dense it was. I didn't really like the cemetery. For one thing, there wasn't much to it, a few tombstones here and there, a crypt, some gargoyles, but overall, it was just annoying. I kept tripping on exposed tree roots and fake plastic bones. It was a pain in the ass, but it was worth it for the one genuine scare I got all night. As I was turning a corner, I felt something grab my leg. I let out my only authentic scream all evening, because I had no idea we weren't alone in the cemetery. The fog had done a great job hiding this guy in a pitch-black morph suit crawling around on all fours. I only saw him because, as I screamed, I also flapped my arms around like a drunk duck trying to take off, and the motion dispersed the fog for a second. The guy crawled away and disappeared behind a tombstone. My friends laughed and laughed and laughed. Whatever, I mumbled, wasn't even scared. We found our way out of the cemetery after that, and headed to the main attraction. The wait was longer than any other attraction at the farm because it was allegedly the scariest of them all. The cream of the crop. Hell, after the scare I'd gotten at the cemetery, my expectations were pretty high for this one. And, man, it was fine. I mean, there were guys in pretty realistic pig masks running after us with chainsaws, but even in the dark, I could tell the blades weren't actually moving. I didn't feel like I was in danger. Well, aside from the very real danger of possibly losing all blood circulation in my arm when one pigman jumped in front of us, and my friend grabbed me so tightly my fingers went numb. She screamed. I just kind of stared at the pigman, unfazed. I half expected him to tell me to feed the pig. Not tonight, buddy. Not tonight. We drove home after that and chatted about our favorite parts of the night. You got so scared in the cemetery, taunted Jules. I huffed. That dude startled the shit out of me. The car went silent. What guy? Someone in the back seat asked. Dude in the morph suit, I answered. Huh. He was crawling on the floor. Didn't see him. I shrugged. It was foggy. We went back to chatting. Eventually, I dropped off everyone at their places. I wasn't tired by the time I got home, so I booted up my computer and uploaded the photos we'd taken that night. Everything was pretty normal until we got to the cemetery. Or rather, after the cemetery. Morph suit guy was in the background of all the other photos I took, which was really strange to me, since I thought the mascots were supposed to stay in their attractions. They had these lame bios for their mascots on the website, so I looked him up just to see. He wasn't listed. I felt a small knot in my stomach, but laughed it off. There were plenty of guests in costumes. Maybe this was an annoying teenager having fun. At this point, I thought I could hear a squirrel or something scratching at my bedroom window, but couldn't spare a glance. I was too busy staring dumbfounded at the website. I'd clicked on the venue map link. I'd noticed the distinct lack of a cemetery. The thought did occur to me that this was all intentional on the part of the people running the farm. A great way to get one last scare out of their guests after they'd gone home. It was as easy as not drawing a cemetery on their little cartoon map. As simple as not including it on the list of attractions. As easy as omitting one spooky mascot from their character bios. I wish that were the case. I wish that, when I looked out the window, I hadn't seen the figure in the morph suit staring back at me, and then quickly skittering backwards across the yard and up to my neighbor's roof. I wish he'd stop crawling nearer whenever I blink or look away. Every time I focus on my screen to write another line, I catch him in my peripheral vision. He's at the window right now. I give him a quick glance. He runs away. I can't help but worry, what'll happen when I close my eyes and fall asleep? I think I'll find out soon. I'm so tired I can't keep my eyes open. Story 4. Help. I have a haunted and or cursed object and I don't know what to do. I need help. About 8 years ago I acquired what I now believe to be a haunted or cursed object. Yes, she happens to be a doll, but moderators, please hear me out. I really need help. She is a small porcelain doll that I bought for $3 from an antique store I used to frequent in college. She was so sweet looking and I had never seen another tiny doll like her, so I took her home. She is about 3 inch tall by 1.5 wide. She is hand-painted, made of porcelain, and has delicate articulated limbs. She didn't come with clothes, and I never thought to try to buy or make any that would fit her. I didn't know that she was haunted or cursed until a few years ago when I came across her again, having packed away many of my things from college. I had put her in a velvet bag and hadn't disturbed her in a long time. My life had been going really well up until then. I was finally at a consistent and happy mental place since graduating college, and when I found her, at first, I was delighted. I had forgotten about her, and as I said before, she is a very sweet-looking little doll, so I admired her for a while before putting her back where I found her. The weeks following my finding her again were filled with an onslaught of various life issues, bad luck, and a serious depressive episode, the worst I had experienced since college. A few months later, I was reorganizing art supplies in my basement and disturbed her again. Once more, I experienced another string of life issues, various things breaking, and a period of having a very bad mental space. It was after that second experience when it finally clicked that each time I had disrupted her, my life and mental health went haywire for a while. I thought I might be overreacting, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. It was shortly after buying her when I really started struggling with my mental health in college. I had her in my room when my roommate and I started having serious issues, and they ended up moving out. She stayed on display while I struggled with the worst nightmares and night terrors I have ever experienced. She sat on my work desk in the same room I made my unaliving attempt. You get the picture. In the worst times of my life, I remember her being there. I've had an interest in finding a way to get rid of her before, but I've always put it on the back burner since I don't think there's a way to get rid of her without massively disturbing her and possibly pissing her off. Well, just before I made my account and started typing this, I accidentally bumped the velvet bag she is in while looking for something, and found myself profusely apologizing to her before backing out of my basement and turning off the lights in the hopes that she would be appeased. It was this reaction that made me realize that I can't do this anymore. I am, logically or not, actually afraid of this little doll, and I don't know what to do with her. I want her out of my house, and I don't want to have to sell her to do it. That would require taking her out to take pictures of her, and then proceeding to upload her onto my phone, my laptop, or both, in order to make a listing. I don't know how much that would anger her, and I don't know if uploading a picture of her would allow her to access my devices. I was once advised to cut a hole in my wall and patch it up with her in it so that she could never be disturbed again, and so that once I eventually sell this house, I would be rid of her, but I don't like that idea at all. I need her gone, but I don't want her going to just anyone. I need to find someone or some place that knows how to handle a haunted and or cursed object, and can protect themselves from it.